Welcome to the Cutting Edge Podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, and this episode is for October 2021. And the topic for tonight is going to be very interesting. We're going to be slightly building on a little bit of what we talked about with the Season 18 episode that we released. But for this particular episode, I think I'm going to be answering some of our audience's burning questions relating to cognitive focus. This episode's title is How to Find Someone's Cognitive Focus. And I'll be actually demonstrating, or at least going over one of the techniques that I use when it comes to finding someone's cognitive focus. But first, we're going to talk about cognitive focus and how it works, and where it comes from, and some of the existing tools that are out there to be able to help determine cognitive focus. So it'll be a fun episode. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about cognitive focus a little bit, but and we're going to get to the how-to portion of the episode. But first, we need to go into some minor details. Yes, that would be a personal record. You're absolutely right, without a doubt. Okay, so let's pick somebody from the audience. Let's pick someone from the audience. Who are we gonna pick on today? Who can we pick on? We're gonna pick on Coach J, because it's safer to pick on Coach J. Just kidding, Jay. No, just kidding. We're gonna pick on Coach J for sure. So let's actually draw out his brain, his soul on paper. Okay. So Coach J, as we are all very aware, he is an INFJ. So we're going to set him up for success. We have INFJ. This is ego. And then we have ESTP, which is the subconscious. And then we have the ISTJ, which is the superego. Oops. Okay, and then the ENFP shadow. It's a little weird. Yeah. All right. So how to determine cognitive focus. All right, so we're also going to draw a picture of Jay. All right, so we got, hold on. It needs to be titled properly. We got Coach Jay in the house. And so here's the four sides of mine. So throughout a person's life, depending on their life stages, they have typical cognitive focus based on typical life stage. And this is a concept that a lot of people don't really realize. So I'm going to make it like a timeline, okay? So I'm going to go all the way across here, and timeline. And then we're going to put death right here. And then we're going to put birth right here. Okay. And then we're going to put, we're going to call this quarter life. Quarter life. And then I'm going to call this midlife. And then we have late life. You like how I just snuck that L in there? It's pretty dope. All right, so that was quarter life. That's not accurate. Okay, so this is basically a general phase of a person's life, in general. But what I want you guys to realize something is that cognitive focus really changes throughout a person's life. Now, most people. Now, it's not to say that people's individual cognitive focus, it is what it is, whatever time it actually is, like in their life. But I'm showing you a very general, we'll say, nurtural example. This is a general nurtural example, so don't think this is like gospel truth, okay? This is a dynamic. This is not a static, okay? And a lot of people get like really confused about this. But ego focus, and this is kind of where a lot of people get really ego focused. And then something interesting happens. And then somewhere in here, after quarter life to midlife, a person is either shadow, or subconscious focus. It's kind of really up to them and where they're at, and depending on how their upbringing is within their childhood, when they're kind of ego focused naturally. Okay. And then at the end, you have kind of a more super ego slant over time. Now, this is very theoretical. This little chart that I'm making down here. This is very theoretical. So take it with many, many, many grains of salt. This is basically a best guess. I don't have any data to support this. I have very little anecdotal evidence to support this. And the main issue that I'm having is that I don't interact with enough people that are in late life to be able to make these judgments. As I get older and I am coming into more contact with elderly folk, I think I'll be able to have the answer to this question. So this is something more or less of what I suspect. So I guess right now you can count this more as an opinion, this chart, as an opinion, an educated guess or an educated opinion more so than a fact. So just many grains of salt with this. But provided there's no trauma or abuse or something bad happening in someone's life, or maybe something super mega good happening in someone's life, the average person would basically move around in terms of the size of their mind from a cognitive focus standpoint based on what stage of life they're in to that end. And the thing is that after quarter life, between quarter life and midlife, whether or not a person is shadow or sub-focused, it really also depends on like where they're at, like how their childhood went, basically. Like I had some really bad childhood trauma that put me more shadow focused. So I'm not actually really going into my subconscious until like I hit midlife stage. So from quarter to midlife stage, I'm really shadow focused. But like with my wife, it's the exact opposite. She's very sub focused right now, and she's actually learning the shadow. Now, there are two theories as to what's actually happening with that. And the theory is one, nurture, and I don't know why I'm writing in here, but I'm pragmatic, so I can, right? Theory one is nurture is causing this to happen, or theory two, it's nature, and it's nature in two different ways. If a person is concrete, basically, they're more likely to be subconscious focused between quarter and midlife, and if they're abstract, it's the opposite basically, and thus mid to late life they would be more shadow focused if they're concrete. If they are abstract, it's the opposite. I don't know if that's true. I don't know yet. This is all very theoretical. So like, welcome to the Cutting Edge Podcast, where we talk theory, right? This is very theoretical. And maybe, some members of the audience can actually come up with, maybe look in their own life and pay a lot of attention with it. But we don't exactly know every single driving force as to what causes cognitive focus to happen. It just happens. And remember, cognitive focus basically is you have your gateway functions here, 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 and here, right? So with gateways, you have your development, and gateways are really where, neural pathways need to be built so that your brain can use the rest of its capacity, basically. You think of your brain as something that has capacity in it, and the neural pathways are there to route the energy that's channeled throughout your brain. It's like it's an electric. It has a substance of electricity basically within your nervous system. We are electrical, and when you're sending those electrical signals down the neural pathways, etc., it causes the neural pathways to grow. It's kind of like having a beaten path or a path that has yet to be trailblazed, right? And this is how cognitive gateways work. And I talk about gateway functions a lot in season 18, a little bit in season 17, and probably the most in season 19. If you've not reviewed season 19 yet, please make sure you do. It's at csjoseph.live/portal. And then in the discover of each of the 16 types, there is the season 19 lecture, which discusses these cognitive gateway functions, which is the hero, inferior, nemesis, and the demon functions, and what they're for. But cognitive focus basically comes that, like, eventually certain gateways are used more than others. Certain gateways end up having a more beaten path than others. And that happens basically through human nurture. At least I can confidently say that it is human nurture more so than nature. Now, granted, there's a competing theory out there saying that, like, okay, that's nice that you have these neural pathways. It's nice that you have cognitive gateways. It's nice that you have cognitive focus, you know. And again, what is cognitive focus? Cognitive focus is that Jay here, for example, what he does is that he favors a certain side of his mind. It's all about favoring a side of the mind. That's all it is. He's showing favoritism. He's been caught red-handed for showing favoritism. Literally, Mr. Favoritism. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Favoritism. So he's favoring a side of the mind. Now, a lot of times, especially when you look at Kiersey and also between Kiersey and Behrens, they often talk about personality type or your persona being a preference. It's what people prefer. And they're really talking about how a person would prefer their ego. And they prefer their ego, and that's really what makes their type. It's kind of like handedness. You know, you're left-handed, right-handed. But there's a sub-preference. And that sub-preference is, okay, if that's my ego, here's what my other four sides of the mind are. But which of my four sides of the mind at that point in time in my life am I favoring the most? For me, I almost always favor my INTJ shadow most of the time. If I could do it with my INTJ shadow, I kind of want to, if I can, basically. And slowly but surely, I am learning to start favoring my ISFJ side of mine, especially when I'm doing Krav Maga. And I failed my recent belt test, actually. That was a very painful experience, but necessary. I'm really bad at blocking, so I'm learning. I'm going to be brushing up on that pretty well. But back to class I go, and I'll do the next test. But it's there's a lot of different things that a person needs to keep track of when they're looking at this sort of stuff. But the bottom line is that while we may favor what our ego is and have a preference towards our ego, once that preference is set, there's sub-preferences, and the next sub-preference, basically another layer deeper, is like, okay, which side of the mind do I prefer or do I favor at a certain time in my life? That, in general, is what cognitive focus is. And based on that favoring of a side of the mind, a person's behavior is a little bit different. This is where you can have an INFJ like Coach J, but they have different variants. They have different variants there's different kinds of INFJs out there. And you could have, so there's 4 different subcategories of INFJ that a person could be at a time. This is, and also, like, when you're looking at cognitive focus, another indicator of cognitive focus, we'll talk this a little bit, is also, it's also based on transition. You know, the volume or frequency. So we'll just do frequency. The frequency of transition, cognitive transition, also helps use your gateway functions. And what it does is it increases that beaten path, makes that path more traveled, essentially. And then as a result of it being more traveled, it's easier for you to cognitive transition over time, and thus it's easier for you to favor that side of the mind. And a really good way of looking at it like this, guys. So I'm gonna use Cayman Talcott as an example. All right, so Cayman is right here. This is Cayman, right here. I wish I could draw him like one of those little characters that they have in Among Us. I think that would be more appropriate. Picture of Cayman here, and he's got a choice. So he's got a choice. So right here, he has a mountain, and then he's standing right here on this flat surface, and then he's got a hill, And this hill's going. And then at the top of the mountain, there's a reward. Ooh. We got a little reward up there. It's star-shaped. It's tasty. It's probably a star-shaped French fry. Let's be honest. Or we have this one down here. There's another reward down here. Another star-shaped French fry. Etc. It's just the difference is that this star-shaped French fry up here has red in it. I don't know if that matters. Maybe it has ketchup. So, but we got Cayman. Cayman's in the house. He's there on this mountain. He's got a choice. I could go up the mountain, which would be a lot of effort to get that reward, or I could go down the hill to go get that reward, right? Well, most people are going to go choose downhill because it's a lot easier. And that's what happens when you're building up your gateway functions through cognitive transition and frequently doing it, because you're basically leveling out this mountain right here. You're leveling out the mountain, and the mountain slowly over time is going to get erased. It's slowly going to get erased. So, for example, the mountain's not much of a problem anymore over time because he keeps cognitive transitioning. He keeps using his gateway functions. And then all of a sudden, something amazing happens. All of a sudden, it just goes downhill too, because the cognitive transitions over time, he don't need that anymore. You don't need it. So now he has two choices. He can go either way and still, obviously the reward has to move. So should this one have been shaped like the Star of David? I don't know. So we got our little reward down there. Now Cayman can go down to his reward. It's downhill now. And this basically is the process of cognitive focus in a person's life. This is also kind of a person's path to enlightenment and how it works inside of their head, their path to integration. They have all of these mountains, and each of the four sides of their mind is a mountain that they have to start at the beginning of their life to basically climb. But then as they're using their neural pathways, as they're using their cognitive gateways, their gateway functions, as they're cognitive transitioning and they're increasing their frequency, eventually those mountains get eroded away, and he's able to cut a path through those mountains, like a mountain pass, basically. And then it's an easy journey. It's a much easier journey because he's made that journey many, many times, and his brain is optimizing that journey into that side of his mind over and over and over, right? So that's basically, in essence, how cognitive focus works. The four sides of your mind are no longer obstacles. They're easy to use and to get to. It's like, I have 4 tools in my toolbox. I really know how to use one tool. The other tools I don't know how to use. But practice makes perfect, right? And each tool is a side of the mind. And by using one tool over the other, he became more practiced with that tool. It's the same concept, okay? And then eventually, Cayman and Coach Jay, for their sides of the mind, will get to a point where they are favoring certain tools over others for certain situations. The thing is that if you think about a person in their life in today's culture, because we don't have the battle of the elements, because we have the affiliative protecting us from natural selection as a barrier to natural selection, because we have the affiliative doing that for us, a person's life, there's not as much challenge or demand on a human being's life in today's day and age. It's just there's not as much challenge, and due to the lack of challenge, it makes it can make it easier for us to become integrated, but it can also make it harder for us to become integrated, because challenge itself is what actually drives us to be able to open these other sides of the mind in a lot of ways. And usually challenge, you can have challenge of the earth, the elements, but you can also have challenge from high camaraderie from other people in your life. The bottom line is that all of this is for developing our brains. It's basically a survival mechanism to give us the ability to withstand the elements and also deal with threats, including fellow human beings. Also to learn from fellow human beings and how to grow. Gateway functions, cognitive transition over gateway functions, and then eventually coming to the point where you're favoring a side of the mind, also known as cognitive focus, you're getting to a point in your life where that is physical, concrete proof that you have grown as a person. The thing is, though, is that when we look at a person's lifespan from birth to death, overall, I've noticed a pattern. I've noticed a pattern that at certain stages of a person's life, some people favor the same side of their mind compared to others. Now, granted, some abstract and concrete in there from a temperament point of view, from a worldview point of view, may change or affect what side of the mind a person favors. Because, for example, between quarter life and midlife, I've noticed that intuitives tend to be shadow focused. Now, the thing is, too, you also have to look at this when you're comparing men from women. I've also noticed that women are more often subconscious focused than men are, regardless of age. So that means, men would be more shadow focused than women are, regardless of age. I have noticed that. But then you can muddy the waters even more when you look at whatever phase of life somebody is in. And that can be, really difficult and interesting too, if you think about it. The point is that I see a pattern. There is a pattern. I just don't know for sure. And that's ultimately, what's happening here. So, but favoring a side of the mind is inevitable. Everyone will do it at some point in time. And it's actually extremely rare, not only for someone to favor their superego, and we've talked about that before, but it's also extremely rare for someone to be favoring their ego. It's really, really rare that happens. And people who end up favoring their ego, the people that I've met that tend to favor their ego, as best as I can tell, and, it just depends on how much time I've spent with a person over time. Like my cousin Mike, he really favors his subconscious, and he's always been that way. I've always noticed that about him. But recently, he started favoring his his shadow a lot more. He's at midlife. He's between midlife and late life now. And all of a sudden, he's favoring his shadow a lot more than he ever has. He's making a lot harder decisions, taking a more managerial role, somewhat more of a taskmaster when it comes to handling a lot of his employees. And he's no longer hiring people based on, who would be like a project for him to work on with his ENFJ subconscious to improve. He's now hiring people based on, okay, are you actually qualified to do the job? Are we going to be able to handle things? Which, makes sense because he led with his subconscious early in his life and helping others and teaching others and developing them. And later in life, he's like, man, I'm really burnt out from doing that. I don't want to do something else. Or I'm getting old. I can't always be doing that. I need something more reliable. So he then tends to use his ESTJ shadow. But then that argument also supports the theory that because he's concrete, he's more likely to favor his subconscious between quarter life and midlife than he is to his shadow, where it would be the reverse for intuitives. But again, that's not always the case. And like I said, gender gets in the way, and that so gender and age is a big deal when it comes to cognitive focus. So your age with your life phase and your gender as well, that can change it as well. And then also obviously a person's nurture and like how they were brought up, how they were raised. Did they have a cruel father like my wife's dad, for example? It's situations like that are extremely, extremely hard. I mean, in fact, like I had an INFJ ex-girlfriend who had a sister, and she claimed that her dad would rape her sister all the time, and then she would offer herself up to her dad to protect her sister from being raped by her father, etc. It's a very sad story and very terrible. And she definitely took that trauma with her in her adulthood. It has definitely dominated her destiny as a person. And it's just been really sad and difficult for that woman and everything that she's been through. And yes, that is circumstance changing a person's preference. Yes. And so for her, she became very shadow focused. And then based on like stories that she would tell in her life, even from quarter life to midlife, and she was still being, sexually abused. And she was significantly older with me because older than me, because like when I was younger, I had a lot of sexual relationships with much older women, and I found that very useful and a wise thing to do, basically, as per Benjamin Franklin's treatise on how to get a mistress, which I highly recommend for any young man to read, and I recommend they also live their life by that when having mistresses. There's a lot of benefits and gifts to having sexual relationships with women and their matron archetype. Huge benefits, and most people are completely unaware of that. Plus, it also inhibits them from committing the sexual sin of having sex with a virgin and then ultimately disparaging her after the fact, which would be bad. Like I say, if you're going to have sex with a virgin as a man, it's your duty or your job to basically be willing to keep her. And if you're not willing to keep her, well, then don't have sex with her then. So for young men, because young men tend to need sex more than women. Women want sex in their older age. Men need sex in their younger age, but then it's the reverse. When men are older, they want sex, but they don't need it. And then women, when they're younger, they want sex, but when they're older, they need sex. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And again, we're showing how needs versus wants actually change. It's kind of similar how if you look at the shadow versus subconscious, the shadow often is a very needs-oriented side of the mind, whereas the subconscious is a very wants-oriented side of the mind. Yes, I know that introverted sensing versus my switch, but when you're actually looking at how people act and behave on a regular basis from a psychological standpoint, it's just, from behavioral psychological standpoint, that is, you'll notice that, depending on subconscious versus shadow, that's just kind of how it goes, right? So, but again, like an ego-focused person is very rare. It's extremely rare. And the people who are ego-focused because they didn't either have as much trauma or whatever, they're very bland. They're very bland people. I find ego-focused people to be really boring. I find them to be very cookie cutter for their type, basically. It's like they don't have any salt. Really bland folk, milk toast-ish for their type. For example, I know an ego-focused INTJ. I actually had a conversation with him today, and I even told him to his face that he's the most moral human being I've ever met in my life. A very honest man, a very, very honest man, but he is ego-focused, and there is something about him that just comes off so childish to me. So childish. And that is often what ego-focused types end up behaving like. They end up being super mega childish. So if you see someone who's behaving childish for their type, usually that's because they're ego-focused. And ego-focused types, they're also kind of lacking a little bit of parent function development as well. And it is true that his parent function is there and he uses it and he's a successful business owner, etc. But when it comes to understanding like what people think and reputation and certain risks thereof, he doesn't use it in a responsible way. He'll use it responsibly for money, but he won't use it responsibly for any other way. And he often ends up leading with his FI child. Again, the most moral, trustworthy person I've ever met. But he can be extremely childish. With his own decision-making and going in that direction. Whereas a shadow-focused INTJ, they just want to know the facts. Give me the facts. They'll look for the facts. They'll force the facts out of you. They will question themselves constantly over and over and over and over, and they need more and more information. So the other INTJ, who's my friend where I live, and we're all in the same circle of friends, which is interesting because we all play Magic the Gathering, he's very shadow-focused. And he's very well read. He's a poet, a very capable person. But the problem is that he's constantly questioning himself all the time, and then he's always constantly questioning everybody else. Whereas the first ego-focused INTJ wasn't really questioning me at all. He never really does. It's all about morals, and anything that he doesn't feel good about, he's going to say something about it because he's often leading with his FI child through his ego focus. Whereas I've noticed that the critic function is what gets led with in the shadow. Oftentimes, it's the critic function that gets led in the shadow, and it's very interesting. When it comes to the superego, naturally, it's the as someone's superego focused, they're obviously leading with the demon, and if they're in their subconscious, they're obviously leading with the inferior, But if you notice, there's different slots that people are leading with depending on their focus. And this is one of the ways that you can identify cognitive focus in a person. If you can actually just think about for a minute, like, okay, which of their functions are they actually leading with consistently? Let's take a look. So something that I've noticed is that when someone is leading, if someone is ego focused, they are often leading with the child. When someone is shadow focused, they are often leading with the critic. When somebody is subconscious focused, they are leading with the inferior. And when they are superego focused, they are leading with the demon. And notice how each of them are in a different attitude slot, if you notice. Each of them are in a different attitude slot. There's a different preference. There's different favoring, but they're all in different attitude slots, basically. Okay? So cognitive focus basically is, which of the functions, which function in which side of the mind is the most prevalent, which one is the most favored. Now, if you'll notice something within this INFJ example, notice how all of the functions that is being led with, they're all introverted. And we all know about how I've, explained the theory of, okay, well, look, an extroverted function technically doesn't exist. It's only an introverted function that technically exists. The introverted function is the cause, while the effect is the extroverted function. It's just like there's no such thing as cold. There's only a such thing as absence of heat, basically, right? So an extroverted function basically is an effect or an absence of or something else, basically. It doesn't technically exist. And this is just an example of an INFJ piece. Now, granted, there could be extroverted functions that would be led within these slots depending on certain types. Like, for example, my type, right? Basically, FE child. If I was ego focused, I'd be really FE focused. If I was, if I'm shadow focused, I'm leading with TE, etc. So just to give you an idea, but like, depending on the functions, how they lead with, when it comes to cognitive focus, it's just additional evidence that we're right with what we're saying when we're comparing the differences between introverted functions or extroverted functions. And this is another way too. This is another way, actually, if you are really having a hard time typing someone and determining, if they are responding versus initiating, and looking at, favored functions within an interaction, you can actually see how they go together. Just like, oh yeah, okay, let's look at which function they're leading with each of the sides of their mind, and help determine cognitive focus. So an ego-focused person leads with the child, and that is that's that INTJ, and then I have that shadow-focused INTJ, and then there's a subconscious-focused INTJ that I know that he's constantly leading. With his inferior function, and everything is all about performance to him. Everything is all about performance. Whereas my INTJ friend who owns the card shop, he's all about morality. Whereas the shadow focused INTJ is all about truth. Basically, it's like the individual sides of the mind have their little virtue that they just cling to, that these people cling to. And they just cling to this one little virtue at this particular time in their life, etc. And, and the shadow focus, like, what's the virtue of the shadow, for an INTJ shadow or an INFJ shadow? Well, that would be introverted sensing. It would be justice. It would be fairness, that kind of a thing, etc. If they're really focused on that. And an example of a superego focused INTJ is James Bond in fiction and Batman. Okay, that's the best example of superego focused INTJ I could recommend. ISTJ focused INFJs. I think Alonzo Harris from Training Day would be another good example, because I maintain he is an INFJ, not an ESTP, even though most of the world out there thinks Alonzo Harris is an ESTP, but that's not the case. And yes, Cayman, it is another type vector as well. But yes, this is in general how cognitive focus really works, and it's all about which function are they leading with the most in these particular slots. So you got to pay attention to these slots specifically, the ones marked in green. And note that what function they're favoring with over time can actually change. Now, that's the why and the what, but how? How do we actually do this? How? So let's explain how. Let's explain how. The shadow-focused INTJ in fiction would be Emperor Palpatine, just to throw that out there. Can the audience tell me right now in this stream, tell me an example of what people are really bad at doing themselves? They are bad at typing people. Not only are they bad at typing people, what are they even far worse at? They're really bad at typing themselves. Really bad at typing themselves. Everybody's bad at typing themselves. I'm bad at typing myself. I was horrible. Okay? Look, I'm 34 years old. I started learning Myers-Briggs Type Indicator basically on my birthday when I was 21 years old. That's the day one of my journey into Jungian analytical psychology. Literally my birthday when I turned 21. Yeah. Or, yeah, I mean, I could make an argument that I lightly touched on it when I was 20, but I didn't really take it seriously until my 21st birthday, and I got completely trashed with a lot of Mai Tais. I like Mai Tais. Sue me. So yes, typing myself is the biggest problem. I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to actually correctly type myself until I was about 25 or 26 years old. So about 4 to 5 years, I didn't actually type myself correctly. I just assumed that the result in the human metrics was accurate. When I first took the human metrics test, which was the most accurate test in those days, still, I maintain human metrics test is even more accurate than the 16personalities.com test. But if human metrics is still around, I don't know. But when I took that test, I scored INFJ first, and then I realized, I could game the system a little bit and just play around with it. And I scored INTJ, and then I actually believed I was INTJ for the longest time because I wanted to be the mastermind. LOL. You know what I'm saying? But the reality of the situation, because I wanted that label, because every user just wants to be a label so we can feel special. LOL. No. Thank you, ESFP Demon. No. I realized I wasn't an INTJ, but it wasn't until I was 25 and my INFJ mentor cornered me because he'd met me face to face for the first time in our life, basically, because we were talking online for the longest time, but then he met me face to face, and meeting me face to face was he's like, holy crap, you're an extrovert. I'm like, what? So I couldn't be an INTJ anymore, and that it was an absolute horrible experience. But anyway, the bottom line is that people can't type themselves. They can't. No one can, honestly. No one really knows themselves that well, especially if you're a Templar type. Templar type's the most external of all the types. They have extroverted sensing and they have extroverted feeling at the same time. They are extremely external. And they can't even remember how their other people's behavior or their own behavior from before. Usually they can remember other people's behavior, but they almost forget their own entirely. So because of that, it's they're walking identity crises every single day of their life anyway, which, if you think about it, is insanely frustrating. So because of that, they almost have no internal point of reference. The only types of the 16 types that would remotely be accurate in typing themselves would probably be philosopher types, because they're introverted feeling, and they are, philosopher types. Introverted feeling with introverted sensing. They just know themselves the most out of all the 16 types. For the Templars, it's even worse. And Wayfarers, it's second worst. And Crusaders, well, we're so adaptable. We just mold ourselves to like everyone else around us anyway. So it's like it's like we have some substance, but we still don't have enough substance, because people would still label us lacking substance, because we just changed ourselves for everybody else. It's really annoying. So people struggle typing themselves. Well, this is why you need to have third parties. So let's just say that these are people who are in Jay's life, and Jay is typing himself. Well, is he going to come up with INFJ? Is he really going to come up with INFJ on his first time? No, he's not. He's not going to come up with that. And I think actually he didn't know what it was himself, and he hired me to help him out, because he needed a third party to actually come in and provide reactions or responses that he could judge himself. This is why people cannot judge themselves. They just can't. Which would be a really, really crazy situation if you judged yourself and were at the mercy of your superego as a way that you couldn't enter into the kingdom of heaven unless you judged yourself, and you had to be at the mercy of your superego judging you. But honestly, people cannot judge themselves accurately. And the reason why is just the nature of the ego. It's almost like a survival instinct. The ego knows that it has to live with itself at the end of the day. And if it has to live with itself at the end of the day, due to the tree of knowledge, basically, in the book of Genesis, it's a form of subjectivity, which means the ego has to live, in order for it to live in the harsh environment of the earth and the harsh social climate of humanity. It has to live in some sort of illusion, some sort of delusion, okay? And it deludes itself. And it uses subjectivity to do that, so that the ego doesn't have to be confronted with reality every single day. Because if it had to be confronted with reality every single day, think of the depression, think of the suicide, think of the self-destruction. Humanity is designed for survival. So utilizing subjectivity in a way to create illusion or to self-delude ourselves into thinking that we're more important than we really actually are, we end up deluding ourselves, but it's also a survival mechanism. It really is. So internal judging is absolutely a waste of time. Even though we have FI, even though we have TI, we have these internal judgment functions. Yes, we have these internal judgment functions, but it doesn't do any good. And sometimes those internal judgment functions are still subject to external judgments of other people. It's like an FJ type. They often only bother to consider whether or not something is true based on whether or not it's already socially acceptable. And because of that, it's hard for them to accept that some lies are socially acceptable. It's really difficult for them, whereas a TP type expects that. And that's just kind of how it is. That's why when the TP side of their subconscious develops for the FJ, later in life, then they're able to have that point of view. Whereas, TPs start out that way and then they end up the opposite. But it always leads to balance. And that's the whole point, it's balance. But the bottom line is that people can't type themselves. They have to rely on third parties. So I'm going to give you folks an exercise that I use in my coaching to help you determine cognitive focus for people in your life, but then also technically people for yourself. But you can't administer it on yourself. Someone else will have to administer it onto you, okay? Because you cannot judge yourself accurately. No one really actually can. Everyone's like, oh, know yourself, know yourself. This is why This is why Plato said, know thyself. This is why Pythagoras, Socrates' master, said the number one rule of life is to respect your own self. Really important. So based on that, it's incredibly important. So let's go through the entire process. So what I do is I like to use relationships because relationships have intimacy, typically, closeness, etc. But most of all, they have contact. And contact and volume of contact is the most important thing when considering cognitive focus. So you want to target a relationship that has contact, okay? This could be a sexual relationship. This could be a friendship. It doesn't matter. This could actually be a parenting relationship between mother and son, mother-daughter, father-daughter, father-son, etc. It doesn't matter. It could also be an academic relationship. It could also be a master slash student education relationship. It doesn't matter. But you need to go and identify a relationship that the subject, whoever it is you're trying to determine the cognitive focus of, you need to find a very, very close relationship. So then you ask this, so you identify the subject, so you ask the subject the question. Ask subject, this question. This is really key. What are the top 5 criticisms you have of that other person? You ask them this. Then you ask them, what are the top 5 things you like about the other person? And then you ask the subject, okay, what are the top 5 criticisms that person would have of you? And then what are the top 5 things that that person would like about you? This is actually a tool that I use sometimes to help actually do something known as third-party typing. Sometimes people hire me, and I have different little exercises like this that I go through. When they're trying to figure out what type their spouse is, but their spouse wasn't there, or what type their ex was. I was hired by an INTJ woman recently who needed my help in determining what type her ex was, etc. And, using this type of thing, this type of exercise, we're able to identify some key points of information. So when a person starts listing out criticisms they have of somebody else, it's kind of easy. And what are the things that they like about something is pretty easy. But then all of a sudden, when you flip the table on them, what are the top 5 criticisms they have of you? And versus what are the top 5 criticisms, what are the top 5 things they like about them? It really exposes to you, the researcher, as to which functions are they really leading with. Because remember, cognitive focus, it's like if they're subconscious focused, if the INFJ is subconscious focused, they're leading with their NI in that subconscious. But NI is already in the lead within their ego. So it's like they're having a double helping of NI, basically, right? If they're ego focused, it's like they're having a double helping of TI. Ego focused INFJs, that's where we get, for example, the negative format of it is TI child God complex, right? It's kind of where it comes from when they're hyper focused on their TI child, right? An ego focused INFJ. And that's how it works, really. It's you're just using those things to kind of identify it, because usually when people are criticizing you, they're criticizing things that are kind of annoying, and TI child God complex to INFJ is really annoying. or a really headstrong, ESTP, them being really headstrong, because that's what happens with NI is the focus of the, IST, the sub is really thing. If the INFJ is super mega depressed all the time, it's feeling extra worthless, that's indicative of an INFJ who is focused in their shadow a lot. If someone example, if I was to ask an INFJ subject, this person, what is the top 5 criticisms of you? And they'd be like, well, they don't like how I cut myself all the time, etc. That kind of thing. So really, I only ask the questions about the likes, really, because sometimes, just for the sake of balance, sometimes you can use the information from the likes, like what does this person like about me? What do I like about them? But really, you ask them to ask themselves, get their opinion of the other person first, like what they criticize, what they like with the other person. But that information is not really relevant. The most relevant information is what they believe, how the other person judges them and perceives them critically, or what do they like about them, basically. But the criticisms is the most important thing. And I find that determining cognitive focus is the easiest if you're doing this comparison tool during, comparing the subject to someone that they're in a sexual relationship with, or someone they used to be in a sexual relationship with. I think you're going to find the best results there. It's the easiest because they have the most contact, right? You want to go for a relationship or a person that has the absolute most contact, the most minutes spent with your subject, basically. And then you just ask them these questions, and it really helps expose which side of the mind at that point in time are they really favoring. What are they favored? You just have to know which functions are being favored by each, by the ego, the subconscious, the shadow, which obviously I have them circled here on the whiteboard in green, for example. So that would be the child for the ego focused person. That would be the inferior function for the ESTP, side of it, etc. It'd be the demon function, thereof. So that's just, the difference, etc. Although I think I circled the NI incorrectly. It should be the SE that's circled in the subconscious side. Sorry, guys. I can't whiteboard to save my life. Anyway, so yeah. In general, this is just one exercise, but you can develop your own exercises. You can develop your own methodologies, as long as you're just understanding that you have to keep track, or at least make sure that you're keeping track of which function is being the one that is most favored, etc. Which one is it, right? Which one is it? So just keep that in mind, guys, when you're looking at these things. No, actually, it is not the SE. I had it right. It's the NI. So that headstrong behavior. So yeah, I had it right all along. I'm just a spaz right now. Just a spaz. So yeah, I think by helping people understand how cognitive focus works a little bit more and how it manifests in a person's behavior, to be aware of concrete versus abstraction, how that may change the shadowish sub-focus between quarter life and late life, etc. And then whether or not their nature, nurture, and gender also comes into play, because that can make some changes. Those are some variables to keep track of and just be aware of when you're doing these things. But if you look at these specific functions that people favor in these slots within the 4 sides of their mind, and then utilize the top 5 criticisms exercise, you can really quickly pinpoint their focus very easily. This is in essence almost exactly how the Enneagram works. And the Enneagram's purpose, its actual functional practical use, is determining cognitive focus. It's just that my problem with the Enneagram is that the Enneagram is incomplete. I maintain it has 12 sides and not 9 sides, but we'll be talking more about that in the future. I actually make some statements about the Enneagram in the Soul Temple episode that I just did this month in season 18. So yeah, well, you're confused, Sarah, because I didn't exactly say what they all are. I've only used the INFJ as an example. I'll probably do an entire episode devoted to positive and negative behavioral traits of each of these functions in these slots in terms of cognitive focus. I'll probably do that in the future. And that may be an aspect of season 18. I don't know, probably not. It may be its own season. I'm not entirely sure, but we're definitely going to be revisiting this and going in a lot deeper. But the thing is, though, is that you may even be able to identify what those behaviors are now by using the top 5 criticisms exercise. Basically, it's a great exercise. It works wonders. It's literally right out of a psychiatry playbook, but it works, and it helps you really just kind of identify where a person is in their life at that point in time based on the relationships that they have with other people, because you're using an external source or a perceived external source to help do that. Because it's not good enough to ask your subject how they see themselves. It's far more valuable to ask your subject how other people see them. And that will reveal cognitive focus. And you don't even have to ask the other third party, the other person. You don't have to ask the other person with the subject what their top 5 criticisms are or do the exercise with them. You don't even have to. Because people's perceived judgments that other people have of them, it really reveals chinks in the armor. It reveals cracks. It reveals something that's closer to the truth. Instead of asking a person how they see themselves or how they view themselves, how they know themselves, because you're just going to get the ego. But by bringing an extroverted source into the conversation with the subject, they're forced to go outside of themselves and then come back. And doing that yields a lot more valuable information than just straight up asking them or having them take a test. So are they basically criticizing themselves, or are they judging themselves via wherever their focus is? No, they're talking about how other people criticize them and how other people judge them. All right. Cool. Well, that is the end of our Cutting Edge podcast episode for October 2021. If you guys have any questions related to this, now would be the time to ask questions. Otherwise, I'm going to be ending the show here. Was that pretty good, guys? Probably weren't expecting something like this. But yeah, just randomly decided to talk about it today. And I think it was kind of necessary and relevant because I noticed some people in the community were struggling with cognitive focus. And I think it's nice to kind of expose some of the systems behind cognitive focus within our brains so that we can, probably make more use of it, etc. in the future. So, yeah. Okay, cool. Looks like we don't have any questions. So thank you all for watching, folks, and thanks for coming tonight. Like I said, the most hardcore people watch the cutting edge ones. Oh, Jimmy's Journey is there. Is this method useful for typing people in general, asking them how others view them instead of asking them questions about themselves? Yes, but again, you have to make sure that they're being honest. So when it comes to actually typing them, you're going to want to ask the subject about more people. And you're also going to have to ask the subject about fair-weathered friends, acquaintances, and as well as people that have the most contact with them. So you're going to have a wide variety, a wide range. And that would actually help a TE user more in typing somebody, because then they could actually break that down into a system of qualification instead of a system of deduction. That is one additional strategy. So anyway, have you ever been unable to type someone? No. It just requires time or contact spent to be able to do that. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next month. Later.